Hey guys, I had a few students, actually a lot of students, message me after the midterm about a question. I think it looks something like this one over here. I think it was question number 5 on CVP. So you probably already know what I'm talking about. Let's solve this together. I figure I just, instead of answering everybody individually, I'll just give you all this solution over here, free of charge. This one's on the house. So it says you have selling price, variable cost per cell phone, annual fixed cost, net after-tax income, and the tax rate. And part A underneath, it tells us, under the current cost and pricing structure, determine the number of units that the company must sell to break even. So for this, you don't even care about the 3 months or the year or the 9 months. You just care about the break-even point. What's the formula for break-even? Put that at the top here. We can say the break-even point in units is going to be the total fixed cost divided by CMU or CMR. CMU, contribution margin per unit. So in this case, we have the total fixed cost. That is 180,000. And what is the CMU? Well, you just take the difference between the selling price. So underneath, I'll put contribution margin per unit is equal to the selling price minus the variable cost per unit. So in this case, that would be 750 minus 450, which is $300. That's the CMU. So I can say here the break-even point, you take the total fixed cost, which is 180,000, divided by 300, and that would give you the answer, 600 units. Okay, so that's in units. That's how much they have to sell. Or I can just put it actually on the side here. I'm going to do 180,000 divided by 300. And then also in part A, it says achieve its desired net income. What is this desired net income? Well, they gave the after-tax income is 360,000. So first of all, to find the required sales in units, remember we do the total fixed cost plus the desired income before tax divided by the, again, CMU. So we have the CMU, we just need to find the income before tax. How can we find the income before tax? We can do the after-tax income divided by 1 minus the tax rate. So in this case, that would be the after-tax income 360,000 divided by 1 minus 0.25. So it's going to be 360,000 divided by 0.75, which is 480,000. That's the desired income before tax. Or you could set it up as like tax rate times X, 0.25 times X equals 360,000, because not 0.25, sorry, 0.75 times X equals 360,000, because if I have to pay 25% of tax, that means I'm left with 75% after tax. So 75% of what? Of X. So if you did 75% of 480,000, it would give you 360,000. But we just use this formula. It's just faster. Divided by 1 minus the tax rate. And then here, now I can say the total fixed cost, brackets, 180,000 plus the income before tax is 480,000 divided by the same CMU of 300. That gives me 2,200 units. That is your two answers to part A. Okay, so this number we found by doing 180,000 plus 480,000 divided by 300. Part B, where it gets fun. You have 3 different scenarios. It says prepare the calculation for each alternative, presenting a CVP statement for the whole year for each alternative. Select the best alternative. Okay, so I'm not sure if they give you exactly the same question, but I'll just solve this as it is, and then I can mention what else you would do if they said it slightly differently, like if they said just for the remainder of the year. So in this question, they had said for the whole year. So that means you have information for the first 3 months given in the question, and they're giving you information for the rest of the year. So let's start off with scenario 1. In this scenario, they tell you reduce the selling price by $80. By 80, not 280, by 80. So let me write that first of all. Selling price is going to be what? Well, the original selling price they gave you in the question was $750. So now if you minus $80 from that, that means the new selling price is going to be $670. 750 minus 80 is 670. And they tell you that the quantity will now increase to 5,000 units sold. So before, for the desired profit, they needed 2,200 units. Now they're going to be selling 5,000 units. So that makes sense. You lower the price, you sell more during the remainder of the year. So during the remainder of the year, meaning for the next 9 months, total fixed and variable costs? No. Total fixed and variable unit costs will stay as budget. So the total fixed cost, that means it's still 180,000. And the variable cost per unit is still $450 per cell phone per unit. So what can I do? Well, first of all, let's find my new CMU, contribution margin per unit. It's going to be the new selling price, which is $670, minus the variable cost per unit, which is still $450. That gives me $220. And now, what is going to happen for the remainder of the year? Let's say I write like remainder of the year. What will be my total contribution margin? For the remainder of the year, it's going to be this contribution margin per unit, 220, times how many units? Times 5,000, right? Because for the rest of the year, it says 5,000 units can be sold during the remainder of the year. So in the remainder of the year, I'm going to make this much, 220 times 5,000. And what did I have from the first 3 months? Already made. What was my contribution margin from the first 3 months? Well, it's the same contribution. No, it was total contribution margin. From the first 3 months, it was $300 from before, right? Because in the first 3 months, the selling price was $750, and this was the variable cost per unit. So it was $300 per unit times how many units did they sell in the first 3 months? Look in the paragraph. It says for the first 3 months of the year, only 400 units had been sold at the established price. So it's going to be 300 times 400. I'm just taking the contribution margin per unit, which here was 300, and timesing it by 400. So I'm going to say equals 300 times 400. And that is basically, I'm doing the contribution margin per unit times the number of units. So the contribution margin per unit was 750 minus 450, which is 300, and times the units was 400 in the question. And here I'm doing the same thing. CMU, contribution margin per unit times the number of units. But here the contribution margin was less. It was just 670 minus the same 450 times 5,000. Okay, so that's how I got those two numbers. So now what is my total contribution margin for the year? I can say the total contribution margin for the year is these two numbers added together. This plus this. And then now what do I have to minus out of that? My total fixed costs. Which, did they change? No, the fixed cost is fixed for the whole year. It doesn't change. So if that's 180,000, that remains the same. They told you in the question as well. In the scenario, it told you total fixed and variable cost unit cost will stay as budgeted. This was budgeted for the whole year. This is not the first 3 months. This is for its 2021 business plan, estimated the following. This means this is their plan for the whole year. After 3 months, they only sold 400 units. So they were like, oh, we're way behind our target of 2,200. But that doesn't mean that this fixed cost is just for 3 months, because a lot of students were asking me about that. So now we can get our operating income, which is these two numbers minus each other. So total contribution margin minus the total fixed cost. That'll give me 1,040,000. Okay, and that might be enough to get you the whole marks, or if they wanted it after tax, you could have figured that out as well. What's the after tax income, or the net income after tax? You could just take this number and times it by 75%. Because if they have to pay 20% in tax, that means they are left with 75% after tax. So you can just take this number, times it by 75%. Or you could do this number times 25%, 1,040,000 times 25%, and then minus it. It'll give you the same answer. I'm just trying to save time here. So that's basically it for scenario 1. Now we have to do the same thing for scenario 2 and 3, and then see which one gives them the highest net income or operating income. It's going to be the same answer, because whichever one gives the highest income before tax will give the highest income after tax. So you could just do the after tax to be on the safe side, because in this question it was not clear, but maybe for you guys they had made it clear. I think some students were saying they had said find the operating income for each scenario or find the net income for each scenario. So I showed you both here. This is operating income, this is net income after tax. Okay, so let's copy paste all of this here and do it underneath for scenario 2. So what is the selling price now? Well, they said reduce variable cost per unit by 30, and the selling price can then be reduced by 50. So that means the selling price used to be 750. So now minus 50, the new selling price is going to be 700. And before the variable cost per unit was staying the same, now the variable cost per unit they're saying is going to reduce by 30. So what did it used to be? It used to be 450. So now it's going to be 450 minus 30. So the new variable cost per unit is going to be 420. What is the contribution margin per unit? Remember, that's the selling price, 700 minus 420, the variable cost per unit. What's the total contribution margin for the remainder of the year? We would take this number, the 280, the contribution margin per unit, and times it by how many units? Now it says it should be able to increase sales to 5,800 units for the remainder of the year. So that means I'm going to times this by 5,800. This is for the remainder of the year. So let me just put on the side there, I did the contribution margin per unit, which is 280, times, or here I'll write it the same as I put above, so CMU times number of units, and the CMU I found by doing 700 minus 420, and then I times it by the new quantity of 5,800. No, this goes here, and here I'm just going to put keep that as a blank. That's fine. Here, oh, so I was supposed to put this underneath. Now, what's the first 3 months contribution margin? Same as before, because it's still going to be 750 minus 450. The original part never changes throughout the question because it was fixed. The first 3 months have already passed. They were selling at a price of 750. Variable cost per unit was 450, and they sold 400 units. That doesn't change throughout any of the scenarios. The only thing that changes is the remainder of the year. So now what's the total contribution margin? I'm going to do this plus this. What's the total fixed cost? Did that change? No, they didn't mention anything about the fixed cost. So you can assume it's the same as above, which is 180,000. So what's their operating income? You would take the total contribution margin minus the total fixed cost. It's basically their revenue, the sales minus the variable cost minus the fixed cost. That's what we're doing here, right? And then here, to get the after-tax income, you would take this number and times it by 75% because there was a 25% tax. And now let's do the same thing for scenario 3. Between scenario 1 and 2, which one do we like more right now? We like scenario 2 more because it's a higher income before and after tax. Let's paste this underneath for scenario 3. And what do we have for the selling price? It says cut fixed cost by 40,000. Okay, so the fixed cost used to be 180, so now the fixed cost is going to be 40,000. So I'll put here first total fixed cost equals 180,000 minus 40,000, which equals to 140,000. And lower the selling price by 10%. So what is the selling price going to be now? You could say basically 90% times. If it decreases by 10%, that means only 90% is left of the 750. Which would be 750 basically minus 75, which is 675. Okay, if you don't like that way, you could times 10% by 750. It's 75, and then do 750 minus 75. It'll give you 675. Just faster, right? Like this. Variable cost per unit will be reduced by 10% also. So the VC per unit, you can also do the same thing. It used to be 450. So now you're going to do 90% times that 450. Or you could times 450 by 10% and then subtract that out. So 450 times 10% is 45. 450 minus 45 is 405. That's your variable cost per unit here. And now you calculate everything. So what's my contribution margin per unit? I take the selling price, 675, minus the variable cost per unit, 405. That gives me this number. What's the total contribution margin? Same thing as what I did here. It's the CMU times the number of units. So in this case, that's going to be what we just did, 675 minus 405 times, what's the quantity now? Sales of 5,500 units are expected for the remainder of the year. So here I'm going to multiply this by 5,500. So here I can say is equal to the CM per unit, 270 times 5,500. That'll give me this number. What's the total contribution margin from the first 3 months? That's same as before. That didn't change. So it's like 300 times 400, 120,000. What's the total contribution margin? Add these two numbers together. Minus, did the fixed cost change? Yeah, this fixed cost before was 180,000 in the previous two scenarios. But now remember, we said it's 140,000. So I'm going to say here it's 140,000. So the operating income is going to be this total contribution margin minus the total fixed cost. That gives us this operating income. And then you times that by 75%. And that'll give you this final answer for the net income after tax. Okay, so which scenario is the best? Scenario 2 or alternative 2. Because it gives the highest net income. or you could say highest operating income. And if they had asked you just for the rest of the year, well, then you would have just taken the remainder of the year numbers for contribution margin. And then for the fixed cost, it's like, you could say it's spread out evenly. So since 3 months out of the year have already passed, here for the rest of the 9 months, it's only 75% of the year left, right? Because there's 4 quarters in a year, 3 months, 6, 9, 12. So you would have taken the fixed cost, 140,000, and times it by 75%, because that's what's left of the year. 25%, the first 3 months have already passed. So you just times this by 75%, and then you would have done the same thing. So you just would not have included the first 3 months number. You would have taken just the remainder of the year. The fixed cost, you would times it by 75%. I'm taking the 140, but like from the previous numbers, like the 180,000, you would times it by 75%. First remainder of the year, you would take this as the contribution margin, this times 75%, and then that would give you operating income or net income. And then you ignore the contribution margin from the first 3 months if they say just for the rest of the year. Okay, but in this question, they said presenting a CVP statement for the whole year. So the whole year means the 3 months that have already passed as well. Okay, but if in your exam they had said just for the remaining 9 months, that's the only difference. You would still set it up the same way. So is that question hard? Yeah, of course, there's always going to be questions like this where it's like not something that we have necessarily seen before. You can still figure it out if you stay calm. Okay, like what can I find? What do I have? Okay, they're talking about variable costs, talking about fixed costs, talking about selling price. Try to think in this chapter on CVP, think about like we are often setting it up like this. CMU, TCM, we've seen all this stuff and you know what the operating income is. So it's just like, okay, let me see what information do I have. Let me set up the 3 scenarios. Let me see which numbers I have. What am I trying to get to? You can get at least some of the marks. You know, if you didn't make the connection about the fixed costs here, maybe you could still, well, the fixed costs were the same in the first 2 scenarios. So that doesn't, you know, maybe you just miss it on scenario 3 or something like that. So it's always doable to get there. Concordia is always like that. There's some stuff, once I explain it, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's easy, you know, but making those connections in the exam is the hard part, where you have to stay calm, keep your composure. If you know the formulas well, you can kind of use deductive logic, like a puzzle. What am I trying to get? So yeah, I'm just sharing this with you guys because I was getting a lot of questions on that, and I figured maybe this is gonna help you kind of just stay calm for the final 2, you know, keep that in mind, that you know the material is just about performance on the exam. You know, like from what I heard, the first 4 questions were not too bad. So I'm happy to hear that. It was just question 5 that students were concerned about. And students ask me, can you include more questions like this in the weeklies and crash? The problem is the way we've set up the weeklies and the crash course is so that we're using the best problems to kind of cover the material. I have to explain the material and then say this is the traditional question that you're going to get on this, and kind of covering as many different parts of the chapter as possible so you get a good grasp of the concept. Like this type of example, if I put it straight into the weeklies or crash, where 3 different scenarios, well, it's going to take away from the actual material that we're covering and going over 3 different scenarios that may or may not show up on the exam. It's only once students tell me this came up this semester, then I included my mocks. That's why the mocks are really the best way to see all the different style of questions. So I'm going to be doing a bunch for the final as well. A lot of you, I think, signed up for the midterm mocks. But just so you know, there's going to be a ton of questions like this, because that's where I can show you, oh, one semester they asked this, one semester they asked that. What would you do here? What would you do there? That's way more efficient than trying to cram everything into a weekly session or into a crash course where we are trying to focus more on understanding the key parts of the chapters. Okay, that's it. Hope you guys found it useful, and I'll see you guys soon.